Today we are going to read the news articles who is taken by dot news to improve all areas of your English. So welcome back to Smile English Lord, and of course I'm Zeeshan. So get that started. Please subscribe this channel and share. And new article is that weather Syria. Weather Syria is that important. Weather Syria. The important history of Syria, that conflict began as a peaceful uprisings against the government of President Bashar al-Assad in March 2011. The protesters were part of the broader Arab Springs movement, which requested democratic reforms and end to authoritarian rules. However, the Syrian government responded with force, leading to widespread violence and formations of opposition groups. That whether Syria, that important article is that it is turned out that there were no speed bumps in the first lane on the road to Damascus. The incredibly swift demise of the Assad regime appears to have astonished everyone, including the rebel force that lead the unaccepted charge. It turned out is that ended up resulted ended up resulted it bump speeds lane on incredibly shift demise have astonished unaccepted charge. Speeds bump obstacles or challenges that slow down progress and momentum. That lean on a phrase indicating a path or course of action that continues to proceed in a specific directions or manner. Incredibly to an extraordinary or remarkable degree, extremely or exceptionally. Shift. Shift is that moving or able to move quickly and promptly, happening or done rapidly. Demise. Demise is that death and terminations. Astonished. Astonished is that amazed, astounded, surprised. Unaccepted charge. Unaccepted charge is that unforeseen expense, surprise fee, sudden expense. The subsequent explosion of relief and joy across much of Syria is hardly a surprise, even though it is tempered with understandable anxiety about what might follow. After all, that the regional presidents from Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, Yemen, and Iraq are hardly subsequent explosion of relief. Hardly surprise that even though tempered with understandable anxiety might follow. After all, presidents that subsequent is that following, next, later, ensuings. Explosion of relief is that flood of relief, surge of relief, wave of relief. Even though is that despite, in spite of, after all is that finally, ultimately, after all, finally, ultimately. Tempered with, Tempered with is that moderated by, balanced with, mixed with. That presidents is that models and patrons guideline. President is that models, patrons and guidelines. Bisharul Asad was the odd one out when the winds of change ushered in the so-called Arab Springs in 2011, and long-standing dominoes tumbled as a popular uprising rattled the regimes, provoking a deadly state response. It was assumed he would share the fate of bin Ali, Hosseini Mubarak, Muammar Gaddafi, or Saddam Hussein. As Robert Fisk recalled, any foreign correspondents who dare to accurately predict that the Syrian dictator might not immediately be toppled was dubbed as Assad apologist. That ushered is to introduce a bring or something new. To introduce or bring or something new. Long standing, long standing, long standing dominoes tumbled, uprising rattled, provoking assumed that correspondents dared of to accurately predict might to toppled, dumped and apologist. That important that synonym is that long standing. Long standing is the long established, well established. Dominoes is a popular board games played with rectangular tiles called dominoes. Each domino has two numbers on it, and player takes turn matching the number or their dominoes to the number to the dominoes hadly played. Tumbled. Tumbled is that fell, dropped. Uprising. Uprising is that revolutions, rebellions. Uprising. Rattled. Rattled is that shaken, disturbed. Provoking. Provoking is that irritating, annoying. Assumed is that supposed, believed. Correspondence is the journalist, reporters, writer. Dare to. Dare to is they dare to the challenging authority. Head to the cause. Accurately is that important. Synonym is that the journalist accurately reported the news. Correctly, exactly. Predict. Predict is that important. The doctor predicts a full recovery from the illness. Forecast, estimate. That predict is that forecast, estimate. Be toppled. Be toppled is that overthrown, ousted, removed. Apologist. Apologist is that defender, advocate. Dubbed is that titled or named. Dubbed is that titled or named. While the Fisk never hesitated to describe in detail and ruthless excesses of the Ba'athist regimes, often interrogating unarmed protesters of other civilians, he also had the temerity to point out that the state did not enjoy the monopoly on the violence. He noted that the frustrations of Al Jazeera correspondents, whose visual evidence of attacks on government forces and of armed insurgents entering Syria from Lebanon was rejected by their employer. That important meaning is that hesitated to ruthless excesses of temerity to point out monopoly and violence is that frustrations, insurgents rejected by, hesitated to, faltered, waived, vacillated. Ruthless is that merciless, heartless. Ruthless is that merciless, heartless. Excesses of is that important meaning extremes of immoderations, immoderations of. Temerity too is that audacity to, impertinence to. Point out is that indicate, show, highlights. Important meaning highlights, emphasize. Monopoly is that dominance, controls, hegemony. Important words dominance, controls. Monopoly is that controls, hegemony. Insurgent is the rebels, revolutionaries. Insurgents is that guerrillas or terrorists. Rejected by, turned down by, refused by. Turned down by, refused by. Denied by. Qatar, after all, was among the Arab brothers backing Jihadist rebel functions in what he had turned into serious civil war alongside the Saudis. Turkey had its own favors and was particularly keen to certain Kurdish militants. The US and the European appendages detested Assad but saw Islamic State as a bigger threat. So did Russia, but unlike the US, it also considered Assad a useful idiot in the Middle East and helped to sustain his regimes through force, including the air power that Damascus lacked. Iran provoked to be another crucial ally, mainly through Hezbollah, which was keen to maintain the arms supply lines from Tehran via Iraq. That in turn gave Israel an excuse of pummel Syria. That important meaning is that turned into, keen to, appendages, detested, sustains, lacked, and excuse of pummel. Turn to a reality, a challenges, a opportunity, a problems, keen to learn, explore, discover, improve. Appendages is that extensions, additions, attachment. Detested is that hated, dispersed, loathed. Lagged is that was missing, was absent, was deficient, was deficient. That excuse too is that reason for, justification for, pretext for. Pummel is that beat, pound. The current Ethiopia might be mature. Ethiopia is a state of intense happiness, excitement, of elations. It is feeling a great of joy or triumph, often accompanied by a sense of pride, satisfactions, and accomplishment. And premature is that only ultimately unripe, immature, and opportune. There was a barely and murmur of surprise when Bashar succeeded his dad in 2000 as the Grand Poobah. When Hafizul Assad died after nearly 30 years in power, the West spotted a potential pawn in the UK trained a pathologist who hinted at a reformist a vision and released a few political prisoners, but soon enough he reverted to the family playbook in repressing both secular democratic and Islamic dissent, and eventually overlooked when even his father nasty reputations for malicious excesses against perceived opponent and their families. Barely, barely murmur of succeeded. Puba spotted potential pawn in ophthalmologist hinted at reformist released reverted to repressing dissent overlook malicious excesses perceived. An important synonym is that barely, barely and scarcely, hardly. Murmur of is that whisper, hum, mutter. Succeeded is that successful, achieved. Puba is self-important. Apompous is pompous. Spotted is that seen, noticed. Potential is that possibility, capability. Pawn in is that move, strategy, plan. Strategy, plans. That ophthalmologist is that eye specialist doctor. Hinted at, implied, suggested, indicated. Reformist is that reformer, transformationalist. Released is that freed, let go, relived, and relieved. Revolted to is that returned, come back. Repressing is that suppressing or restricting. Dissent is that disagreement, oppositions. Malicious is that important word is that wicked, vicious. Excessive is that extravagations, surpluses. Perceived is that felt, understood, seen, experienced. Emerging emerging from prisoner gates in the past few days had not seen their families or fears. Even decades, some of them had survived the Arab most infamous torture. That chambers facilities of which the US made full use during its war on terror. At the same time, some of the new conservatives in the Bush administration salivated at the prospect of carving a road to Damascus via Baghdad and Tehran. The disaster occupations of Iraq permitted of further large-scale misadventures in the Middle East, but realization that the regions would be best off without Euro-US interference in year two dawns. Joe Biden has claimed credit for the Assad departure of Moscow. She has, as has Benjamin Netanyahu, even as both the US and Israel have subsequently been pounding respectively IS strongholds that the Syrian army weapons arsenals or so they say. Israel has also pounced on the opportunity to overrun the 50-year buffer zones between the occupied and illegally annexed Golan Heights and even enter the Syrian territory. The temporary grab might not be reversed that a leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS in centrally closely related to both and AI al-Qaeda and tracked dissidents of al-Nasrullah Front Heathrow, known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, with a $10 million prize on his head, has reinvented to himself as armed al-Shura and is being paraded on Western media outlets as a pragmatist who has overcome his allergies to Syria, Alawite Christians, and Druze denizens. The Kurdish targeted by Turkey might be less enamored of his uncertified credentials. Emerging from prison gates, seen, survived infamous torture. Facilities of war on terror celebrated at prospects of carvings, disaster occupations of preempted large-scale misadvantage realizations best of interference, yet to dawn, claimed credit, subsequently poundings respectively, originals pounced on to over. That important is that meaning emerging from, come out of, emerging from. That important survived is that lived through, endured. Infamous is that notorious, disreputable. Torture is that agony, pains. Facilities of amenities, services. War on terror. War on terror is that counter-terrorism campaigns salvated at derolled water. Prospects of possibilities of change of. Curving is that cutting, shaping. Disaster is that calamitous, catastrophical, devastating. Occupation of capture, conquest. Preempted is that prevented, anticipated. Large scale, extensive, widespread. Misadventures, misadventure is that mishap, misfortunes. Realization is that awareness. Best of is that bitter of, well of. Interference is that obstructions, hindrance. Yet to dawn, yet to come, yet to arrive. Claimed credit is that took credit. Subsequently is that afterward. Followings is that pounding is that beatings, hummerings. Respectively is that in order, in consequence. Is that additionals is that harmonious, monitions. Pounds on is that pounds on, jumped on. To overrun is that overpower, overwhelm. Annexed is that added, appended, temporary. Is that temporary. Land grab is that land size. Reversed is that reverted. Turn back. Uncentrally is that hereditarily, inherently. Linearly related to is that associated with, connected to. Is that descended of, hair of spiring. Heathrow is that until now, so far, up to now. Reinvented is that redesigned, recreated. Parodied on is that marched on, proceeds on. Is that outlets is that stores, shops. Pragmatist is that practical, pragmatics. Overcomes is that conquer. Allergies is that sensitives, intolerance to. Targeted by. Enamored of is that smitten with, infatuated with. Uncertified is that unqualified, unauthorized. Credential is that qualification, certifications. Whatever name the prefer, Al Julani is destined for a key role in Syria, purportedly 18-month transitions during with ideologically and ethically diverse pitchwork of Assad opponents to accepted to morph into a coherent government. That important meaning is that prefer, destined for, purportedly transitions ideologically, ethnically diverse, accepted to. Prefer is that likes, favor, destined for, mean for, intended for. Purportedly is that illegally claimed. Transition is that change, transformations, ideologically, philosophically, principally. Ethnically is that racially, culturally. Diverse is that weird, different, unique. Accepted to is that anticipated, projected. Morph into is that transform, change. Coherent is that logical, consistent, and clear. And clear. HTS terrorist design designations might quickly disappear, but there were many other groups backed by ill-intentioned neighbors or more distant contenders jostling for prominence in whatever comes next. Syria's sordid past is open to investigation, but the future is unwritten. Inclusive, pluralist, democratic entity in the short terms might require a second miracle. Important designations quickly disappear, backed by ill-dimensioned dissent. Contenders jostling for prominence. Syria's sordid, unwritten, inclusive entity might require a miracle. Designations and positions, appointment quickly disappear to vanish quickly to disappear rapidly. That backed by is that supported, funded. Ill-intentioned is that malicious, malevolent. Dissent is that far removed, separate. Contenders is that rivals, challenges. That jostling for, vying for, competing for, struggling for. Prominence is that importance, fame. Importance, fame. Sordid is that dirty, filthy. Dirty, filthy. That inclusive is that comprehensive, universal. Entity is that things, object, person. Require is that need, necessity, essentials. Miracle. Miracle is that wonder, marvel, astonishment. So please subscribe this channels and share, and please subscribe these channels and promote my videos, and thank you very much.